Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Now, on July 16th, 2008, George Anthony would actually be on his way to an impound lot to get his car out of the impound. This will, of course, be the car that he had actually given his daughter, Casey Anthony, as a way to not only go to work and back, but also so she was able to drop Kaylee off at a babysitter's or just whatever she needed to do as a mom. He figured this would be a lot easier than Casey using a taxi or just knowing how expensive that could be. Now, how it would end up in the impound lot as Casey was driving around during that entire month that she was partying with her boyfriend, which I think his name is Tony Lazzaro. And during the time that she had spent the 31 days with her boyfriend, Tony Lazzaro, she would be using her car going back and forth to these different parties and wherever they needed to go. And eventually she would be running out of gas. She would be so much out of gas that it would actually be riding on fumes, and she would just kind of drift this car onto one of those get cash now kind of places. And when she would actually cash her check, she would realize that the cost to tow her car from that particular spot to the place where Tony Lazzaro lived would be about as much as what her paycheck was, and she didn't want to spend all of her money on that tow fee, so she would just abandon the car. Now, it's around this time when George Anthony would be taking his car home. 911 dispatchers would get at least 3 different 911 calls from Cindy Anthony. Every single one of them, Cindy would be very hysterical. The first call would be a very angry Cindy Anthony charging her daughter with stealing the car. Now, at some point, George would return home with this car and Cindy Anthony would call 911 again, but this time it would not be about the car. The second 911 call would be to report her granddaughter missing and had been missing for 31 days. And would also tell the 911 dispatcher that they had just received their car that Casey had been using, and would inform the dispatcher that the trunk of the car smelt like an unalived body. They would then again get a third 911 dispatch call from Cindy telling the dispatchers that the nanny that Casey had been using, Zerneda Fernandez Gonzalez, or Zanny the nanny for short, had actually abducted Kaylee Anthony. So with these 3 different phone calls that dispatchers would receive, they would quickly send police over to the residence so that they could try to help find Kaylee Anthony. Now, that while they would wait for the police to arrive, the dispatcher would ask to talk to Casey Anthony and ask any questions about the whereabouts of their daughter. Her daughter, sorry. To which Casey Anthony would seem very uninterested to speak to the dispatcher and would just be very evasive. And in this phone call, it was very apparent that Casey just had no sense of urgency. And you could just tell that she just did not have any interest in talking to the dispatcher. She would not show any honest emotion until the police would actually arrive at the home, which there was more concern and worry in her voice. Detective Yuri Malik would essentially lead the investigation trying to find out where Kaylee Anthony was. But after this investigation or interview, it would leave more questions than answers. Now, while Yuri was investigating or interrogating Casey Anthony, Sheriff Jerry Demings would actually be putting every information he could about Kaylee within the general public, and would actually be getting together a team so that they could try to find Kaylee before anything dire would actually happen to the little girl. So he would be sending a lot of police overs to doors, seeing if they had found little Kaylee Anthony. And of course, this would get the media attention. Yuri would quickly have his doubts about Casey Anthony, as just her demeanor in the interview would just show that she did not show sure signs of what normal mothers acted like with their missing daughter, as she would sit across from him with crossed arms and giving very short answers. He would first question about the nanny, Zerneda, or Zanny the nanny, and would quickly ask what her cell phone number was, To which Casey Anthony would tell Yuri that her phone had been turned off. Yuri would try to let Casey know that even if her phone had been turned off, they had equipment or ways to contact or just track what she had been doing within the last few days through cell phone towers. To which Casey would reply, she doesn't remember her phone number. Being very frustrated, Yuri would at least ask Casey to describe Zanny. To which Casey would respond, she's half Puerto Rican, half white, 25, and would even go as far to call her a complete 10. Yuri would then ask how did she come into contact with Zenaida, and this is where she would inform them about her co-worker, Jeffrey Hopkins, who would have a son named Zach. And while she was working at Universal, would say that he had a nanny that he used named Zenaida. And being that child care services was extremely expensive, she was more reasonable. And to save money, they would often carpool, so they weren't spending a lot of money on gas. So Yuri would ask what Jeffrey's phone number was, to where Casey would ironically say this: that 9 months ago, Jeffrey had actually left Universal Studios and had actually moved to North Carolina. And when Yuri would ask what his phone number was, ironically again, his phone number had magically been turned off. She would go further and say that while she was carpooling with Jeffrey, Zenaida had actually lived with her parents in one apartment complex. And around the time that Jeffrey had moved, she had actually relocated to a different apartment complex to her own place, and she had been dropping Kaylee off there at this point in time. She would tell Yuri that the last time she had seen her daughter was June 14th, and would arrive at the home of Zanny and would notice that she was not home, would go to other places that she had not heard of. So when she could not find her daughter, she would just go to her boyfriend's house, Tony Lazzaro. She would tell Yuri that after having such a stressful day, she would pour herself a stiff drink so she could kind of de-stress. And to Casey Anthony, this would seem completely normal, as it was a normal way to act for their missing daughter. But Tony Lazzaro would tell the police when they would question him that he had no idea that Kaylee had been missing, and Casey had shown no signs of her daughter being missing during the entire 31 days that she was there. Yuri would then ask Casey if she had contacted anyone looking for her daughter Kaylee, and she would say that she would actually get into contact with Jeffrey Hopkins, seeing if Zenaida had any other newer phones looking for her daughter. Yuri would then ask if anyone can collaborate the story, to where she would mention another name, co-worker Juliette Lewis, and would talk about how Zanny had kidnapped her daughter and that she had been looking for her. So Yuri would ask for her phone number so he could kind of collaborate her story. To which Casey Anthony again would tell Yuri that she had recently relocated to New York and changed her number. It's around this time that Yuri was completely confident that Casey Anthony was not being very forthcoming with the investigation. He would then ask Casey why you didn't report this to the police sooner, and she would say that it was foolish and she was naive and thought that she could handle it on her own. Yuri would then lock eyes with Casey Anthony and would ask her, "Did you in any way injure your child?" In a very calm voice, almost as if she was expecting this question, would look at him and say, "No, sir." And as I had said before in the video earlier, the investigation that Yuri would uncover would leave more questions than answers.